Member for Cariboo North.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. It is an honour and a privilege today to have the opportunity to rise and take part of a very important discussion about working towards our commitment to reconciliation and the betterment of educational outcomes for First Nations British Columbia's. Earlier today, I just wanted to acknowledge that we had some young leaders in the gallery, and I had the privilege to spend a few moments with them to talk about leadership and how our paths, each of us, our journeys to come to this place. And the comments that I made and what got me involved in politics, and particularly, my hopes, was around education. And it was around the fact that at the time in my community that we didn't have the availability to continue on with post-secondary education in the North. And I reflected to the young people who I know have just left the gallery to go to another presentation, the meaningful work to ensure that everyone has access to quality post-secondary across this province. And today is important steps as we look at supporting our First Nations communities on that journey. This legislation established a framework for providing ongoing operational and capacity funding for First Nations mandated institutions. And I know anyone who's worked in the sector how critical it is to have that assurance of ongoing operational funding. It is really difficult to drive the type of change all of us hope and want in our communities when we do not have access to that ongoing, stable, consistent operational funding. So this is an important step forward in that. And it also supports capacity building in our First Nations communities and the instituted mandated institutions, because we all know how difficult it is often to meet the call of proposals when you don't have the capacity available to even put the grants forward. So I'm hopeful as we continue on and review this legislation that we'll have the opportunity to do an in-depth look at how that will work, with the hopes at all times that we find ways to better prepare First Nations and all people in our province to follow their dreams, to follow their hopes and their dreams of giving back to their communities. And I want to reflect on a few personal stories and people that have had a meaningful impact in my life, and why this bill and the hopes I have for this bill, how it reflects on communities like mine. The first is a significant part of the work that the First Nations Steering Committee and the Indigenous Adult Learning Association, and I want to recognize and thank the leadership in both these organizations for their efforts on the steering committee. We had the opportunity back, I think in 2015, to work with the BC Aboriginal Post-Secondary Education and Training Partners Group to have a MOU to facilitate the collective efforts to improve levels of participation and success of Aboriginal learners in post-secondary. So the member who spoke before me is right. This has been decades of work that has led up to this. But what is critical and so important right now, especially with a strong focus on the urgent need for language learning and revitalization, is that we need to ensure that our elders' voices are reflected. And when I was home this past weekend, two important conversations happened for me. And the first is Doreen Patrick. And Doreen attended residential schools, and it's had a significant impact on her life. And she talks openly about the needs as part of feeling safe in their communities and the cultural significance, how language has played such a vital role. And the second call I had this weekend as we try and bridge and bring people together in our region is Ellie Peters, another elder impacted by residential schools. Both of these incredible elders are leaders, not just in our community, but our region, because they are teaching the carrier language, the Diketh language. Dahuja si Suzi Corley Oaks, Netchalia. They've been doing such an admirable job of not just providing the language in our, first they were passionate in our K-12 system and now in our post-secondary, but they've also reached out to all members in our community and have offered important courses, because I think language revitalization should be for all of us. We should all take the important efforts to learn the languages. And I'm hopeful that, led by our First Nations and our elders and the people who I have such incredible respect and admiration for, that we're going to see significant change. And I'm hopeful for this bill that this will provide the opportunities for people in our communities to do that important work. I looked at some of the mandated institutions, and we're a little bit left out in our area. So perhaps as we're going through the committee process, there's an opportunity to gain better information, so I can carry that back to our communities, because I think we have so much to give. Our elders have so much to give to supporting this. I think all members of this House come with a strong sense of hope for our next generation, and making sure our community members and our young people all see a path forward. And I know, coming from a smaller, rural, remote riding where there is many Indigenous communities, that often that pathway towards hope and that pathway towards post-secondary or advanced education seems awfully far away. It is difficult coming from our smaller communities when our only access to education sometimes is, hours away, without the structures, without the support, without the cultural support that we're used to in our communities. And for First Nations, it is so much more than that. And as the fastest growing population in British Columbia, it is paramount for all of us to make sure our young Indigenous First Nations have every opportunity to follow their dreams and to find success in whatever pathway they look towards. I am hopeful that this bill, which I do believe is an important step in recognizing the important role of First Nations-led post-secondary institutions, that we ensure that at all times our students are protected. I think that is something all sides of this House know how critically important that is, and that the accreditations and the credentialing ensures that they have absolutely every access to continue on and follow their pathway. I also wanted to take a moment, if I may, to reflect on a couple of young people I recently had the opportunity to connect with. We had our Aboriginal Cultural Days 2 weeks ago at the College of New Caledonia at the North Caribou Community Campus in my riding. And I walked in the door to, hopefully I was so excited to purchase some of the incredible crafts that the artisans had brought forward. And two young people came running up to me who I had not seen in a while. And Celestine, who had worked as a co-op student in my office, said, "Look, I'm so excited. I've picked up my nursing package. I am so excited that I want to be a nurse and I want to go back into my community." And the Lataco counselor was with her, and I just thought that that's, to me, what success looks like, that where that young, bright, intelligent, hopeful person sees a pathway towards post-secondary education and to follow their dreams and to take that back into community to build incredibly important capacity, I think is so critical. So Celestine, I am so cheering you on, and you know that both myself and Jackie at our office, whatever we can do to help support you, we're just incredibly proud of this step that you're taking on this journey. And another young lady who was with her was looking at becoming an early childhood educator, both also in Lataco First Nations. And I thought, wow, that's incredible. I talked to the counselor, Tim, after, because I really, really appreciate the approach that Lataco Chief and Council are looking at their support of post-secondary education and what that can mean in supporting their community members to get access into that. Because when we talk about building capacities, especially in our First Nations communities, it's so critically important that we have the teachers and the nurses and the social workers that are in those communities, and they see a pathway towards that. But there are all still significant barriers, and I think the organizations, the First Nations Steering Committee and the Indigenous Adult Learning Association has done an important job of identifying that it is often very difficult and there's gaps to learning in order to access that. And whether it's getting courses for entrance preparation or transfer courses, that is, the type of security of operational fundings to make sure that those efforts are available, I think is critically important. I talked last year during the estimates process about the student transition project, Transitions of BC High School Graduates into BC Public Post-Secondary Education, and that was prepared in June of 2023, and we've seen a significant decline in students transitioning from K-12 and into post-secondary, in particular Aboriginal and males. And I'm hoping that this bill, and under the leadership, the First Nations leadership, we look to find new ways to support success in that transition. And so having that focus of First Nations, led by First Nations in First Nations mandated post-secondary institutions, I think is really important. Another key area that we will focus on when we get to the committee, just to give staff that heads up, because we always want to to talk about the key areas, is how learners will move into the post-secondary education system is critical. We really do need to be paying attention to what's happening with post-secondary institutions. I have raised multiple times my significant concerns that we have to look at the funding model. We have to look at how we are doing things, because we need to make sure everyone has access to very critical, important training. I know in government, there's often language that is discussed around, whether it's 80% of jobs in the future are going to require some kind of post-secondary, and it's easy. I think it's easy for us to get caught up in the rhetoric of numbers and stats and forget about what those numbers represent in their people. And they're people that we care deeply for in our communities, and how do we make sure that there's equity and make sure that whether you live in Nasco or whether you live in Clus Clus, Dene, or Estella, or I could list communities across this province, that there's equity and there's the ability for everyone to have access to training in a safe and culturally respected way. So BC United stands ready to ensure that this legislation is not just a promise, but something that's practical, that's really going to change the lives of people in our communities. Because our communities are hurting. And I think this is a strong path forward. Thank you.